Do you know why Adele crossed the road, Reimler?
I do not.
To say hello from the other side.
I walked right into that one.
Yeah, you
I
did.
should have picked up on that.
You're listening to 54665, all things Viroqua, all things economic development, all things rural America, and today, all things Aaron Reimler. How was that?
That was great.
Yeah.
I hope
Awesome.
I hope I can live up to that intro.
The hype? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard. I know, I set a high bar.
Yeah.
But the idea, it's like the Paul Wellstone quote, we all do better when we all do better. I feel like if I started up there, then everyone else just kind of naturally flows.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I'm with you.
Great.
Nora, introduce our guest, would you please?
I want Aaron to introduce himself.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
sure,
I
why
think
not?
that's the best
Did
way
we
to
give
do
him
it.
a mic?
Yeah.
Okay, good. He has his own mic. He can introduce himself.
Hello.
Hi, Adele.
Hi.
All right, Aaron, tell us about yourself.
Well, my name is Aaron Reimler. I work for Couleecap in La Crosse. My official title is Business and Income Developer, and I oversee all of our economic development programming.
Nice.
Which is a lot of
That's-
work.
yeah, it's-
You have
it
a
is,
huge
yeah.
territory. Let's talk about who are you working with and what's your territory like?
Well, we Couleecap as an organization covers 4 counties, so that's La Crosse, Vernon, Monroe, and Crawford. So with my job, being kind of a one-man show, my ability to do my job is really based on my ability to make partners and form partnerships. So we work with a lot of chambers and Main Street organizations, people in local government, and then just a lot of really supportive business owners. So, I think it's the partnership we have, especially between Couleecap and the Viroqua Chamber Main Street, is really emblematic of how we are able to, find creative solutions to the problems that exist within these different towns throughout
Yeah.
those 4 counties.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Very good.
What's the focus and mission of Couleecap? I mean, I think that for listeners who maybe aren't as familiar in the local geographic area,
Sure.
talk to us a little bit about what Couleecap does.
So Couleecap, at its core, is an anti-poverty organization. So the CAP at the end of CAP stands for Community Action Program. And we came out of in the 60s. I'm not going to remember the president who signed it into law, but it was an anti-poverty act basically that established organizations like ours, and they located specifically in places like Westby because back then poverty was really concentrated in rural areas. So rather than going to the urban centers where it was maybe a little easier to operate, they located the offices right where the problems existed. So since then, we've grown a lot. We're part of a statewide network of community action programs. So we cover a pretty wide range of services from housing programs and fighting homelessness to we operate a couple food pantries. We do some drug counseling, and then, of course, some local economic development.
Okay.
It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. We're
Pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, we're a pretty big organization.
So, talking about that rural poverty piece, right, if we can for just a second. Obviously in the changing times in America, we still see the push-pull, obviously. And for Vernon County specifically, one of the stats that gets tossed around, if there's 72 counties in Wisconsin, it used to be the statistic, right? I've heard it quoted many times that Vernon County was like one of the 3 poorest. But that's not the case anymore, is it? What I'm pushing at is, are the divides getting better in rural America? Is the economic help more dispersed in today's day and age? Are we more aware of it? Or has the nature of Couleecap's mission just stayed constant and true because the poverty has not changed?
Well, one of the biggest things that I think has changed as far as that divide is we've really learned to look at things on more of a regional basis rather than just relying on larger comprehensive measurements, right? Like we take a closer look at what barriers or what characteristics of certain areas make them the way that they are. So while Couleecap's mission has always been the same, we're always have been an anti-poverty organization, I think we've been able to change the way that we try to process some of these things, and we've done a better job at paying more attention to what really exists in these towns, and not just taking one thing and thinking that it applies somewhere else.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's important to note that, kind of going off of that question, I think it's important to note that Vernon County is not one of the poorest counties.
Yeah.
I think because you get statistics like that, and then people start to share them on social media or talk about them at events, and then people take in that information, and then they continue not only to spread it but believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really dangerous way of doing things, just because things are not that way here, and things are good, and so there's so much more to be celebrated than people realize.
Absolutely. I think what I see though is it's like a dichotomy between not necessarily like right and wrong, but I think that you can kind of break that idea into two camps. People who look at that and like, well, that's not necessarily the way it is. Or there's people who hold on to that because that's the perception, and outside of just general economic, flush, which is hard to do in rural America. Mm-hmm. A lot of this is a perception battle.
Yeah.
How much of Couleecap's job is like fighting that perception and really identifying what true poverty is, and then providing assistance to that community, as opposed to, the perception of poverty. Do you get involved in that?
Yeah, I'd say that's something that comes up pretty frequently. I think people kind of think that a lot of this stuff exists in a vacuum, right? And there's just all of these universal concepts that apply to poverty, and we should always just be fighting those, but that's not really the case, right? And especially with, we're an organization that's been around for a while. People know who we are. People know, like, they see the Couleecap logo and they know what it is. They associate it with certain things. Some of it is negative, unfortunately. We are involved in creating affordable housing projects, right? So people see the Couleecap name and they conjure up all of the bad images that normally come along with when you say affordable housing, right? The whole not in my backyard syndrome and all that good stuff. So I think, we definitely try to spend a lot of time, getting through those stigmas and getting away from them. And, we try to do research as much as we can. I mean, we talk to people, we release needs assessments every 3 years to try to educate the community on what really exists as far as poverty and the barriers that are there. And then, there's always like branding issues too. Like, we, especially with my job, working in economic development, my focus, a lot of my focus is working with economically disadvantaged people, but I also work with people that, are all over the income scale. So, it's kind of a weird paradigm to work with sometimes, but I think, doing everything that we can to make sure that we're educating people about those stigmas and, disproving most of them is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we work on together. I think it's really important to give listeners an introduction to co-starters specifically, just because that's something that really serves to empower entrepreneurs and gives them little bit of a fast dive into what it's like to own and operate a business. What is Co-Starters?
So Co-Starters is a 9-week entrepreneurial training program. It was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee in 2008 when some people kind of got together and just realized that there was kind of these influx of folks that were creative and had a lot of creative ideas, whether they be artists or people that had creative ideas for a restaurant or what have you, but didn't really have a lot of business knowledge. So they were, they had something really cool that they wanted to sell, but they needed the support to figure out the back end. So rather than kind of just take the SBA model and try to make a course that was full of all these MBA terms to make people or to help people understand business, they created Co-Starters. And it's a really accessible, action-driven, collaborative curriculum and approach to business development. It's based off the Lean Business Model Canvas, which essentially just has you start with a business plan on one page, and then kind of as you're moving through your ideas and building your model, you can kind of use that canvas as a visual way of organizing those ideas. So it's not like a course in which you're going to be lectured at by a lecturing expert or a small business expert. We generally contract out small business owners to facilitate the course. So they're hearing from people that have actually done this stuff before, and they're not being taught. They're there to facilitate a conversation. Each week kind of has a different focus and a different tool that's geared towards, getting your business started and putting another piece of that model together. And we always bring in guest speakers from around the community to lend unique insight on things like accounting and business structure and marketing and all that stuff. And I think one of the greatest things that environment creates beyond efficient and effective small business development is people are able to leave the course with a network, or the start of one anyways.
Yep.
And they're always going to be a little bit more connected to their community than when they got there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure. Do you find that idea, like the entrepreneurial connection, obviously with Couleecap being an anti-poverty organization, does that really assist? I mean, do you look for data that drives those two together? Community connection among entrepreneurs and that fight against poverty?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about like the ecosystem, right? The entrepreneurial ecosystem for small business. And a lot of that really starts with the small business owners themselves, just being willing to network and speak to one another and offer support when support can be given. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of the case of, rising tides raise all ships, right? If we can create opportunities, then it's going to be better for everybody. Mm-hmm. The other thing about entrepreneurship and using that as a means to fight poverty is you're giving someone the opportunity to create their own job, basically. So, we take the skills that someone has and the assets or what have you that they can provide to the market, and we give them the tools to get there. So it's kind of a twofold answer. We're giving people the resources that they need to create and kind of locally source their own wealth. And then we're creating an environment in which small business can be stronger and more dollars are going to be recirculated locally. So there'll be more money for us to help people out.
Sure. One of the things I kind of want to segue into for 1 second is the perception of poverty, right? Obviously, poverty exists, and its effects are devastating. So I don't want to underscore that.
Sure.
But one of the things that, Nora, we have often remarked when we go to economic development summits is there are intangibles in this area that aren't measured statistically. So for an entrepreneur looking to start a business and going into what is demographically and statistically speaking a financially impoverished area. Viroqua, a couple years ago, there was a report released saying that we had the lowest median income of any city under 10,000 in the state of Wisconsin. However, our population has steadily grown, specifically for young families under 30. And there's a dichotomy in that somewhere, right? People are moving here because it's a lifestyle.
Yep.
They want to embrace that. If I'm a young entrepreneur and I'm looking for ways to kind of come in and understand a little bit of the demographic that I might be serving, what advice would you have? Like, how would you steer them in this process?
Well, I think part of it goes back to the need to look at things regionally. You know, we talk about this idea that rural towns kind of conjure in people that, you know, maybe haven't spent a lot of time in rural America, or just, you know, maybe grew up somewhere that gave them a negative connotation of it for whatever reason. So I think, you know, being able to look at different areas of the country in their own kind of unique lens is really important. So you take Viroqua, for example, and, you know, you just walk down Main Street and you can almost feel the vibrancy for small businesses and the opportunity that can exist there. So I think, like you said, there are a lot of intangibles. There are a lot of things you can't just research on the internet or find from the Census Bureau page that are going to give you the answers that you need. So I think it's, you know, one of the things that Co-Starters really pushes too is just getting out and talking to people. You know, the whole course we're asking people, you know, how many customers did you talk to last week? So I think really taking that action-driven approach to just, you know, you got to go out and you got to talk to people, you know, participate in networking events, you know, go talk to your local chamber of commerce. You know, there's just there's a lot of things you're not going to be able to find on the internet or, you know, be able to quantify in a spreadsheet.
Sure.
So to really understand the local market and the local demographic, you kind of have to make a conscious effort to exist in it a little bit.
Yeah. That's smart. If there was one statistic that you could change, like if you could drive change for one statistic for the demographic that you serve, in order to better understand and create that bridge of understanding in the community or outside the region even, if it's from a state level or like a macro national level, what would that be? Like, what would you try and have people understand about the region that you serve for entrepreneurs? Even if it's a perception, you know, like if for me, right, going back to that lifestyle piece, you know, people are moving here because in the 70s there was a large back to the land movement. People who came out of rural America or urban America, excuse me, to come to the Driftless region and settle because it was affordable. There were some intentional communities. You know, it was this place where people could kind of settle into if they wanted a small farming operation because land was still available. We can't really do large-scale agriculture here because of the geography and the geology. It doesn't necessarily allow itself to these big, sweeping farms. Sure. So it gave a lot of people the opportunity to come here and almost push reset. And I think we still see that. You know, the abundance of cooperative business structure here. Alternative business is you know, it's a strong part of this market. If you were broadcasting to a macro, like the perception that you would want to pinpoint and say like, hey, on paper, this place looks like this, but in reality, you really want to change this one thing that people might understand about this place looking at it on paper.
Well, one of the things that I think, you know, like people, like I said, with people looking at this stuff like it's in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
You know, we look at these things from a very macro perspective because the statistics make it easy to do that, and I don't necessarily think that's always the most accurate way to evaluate, you know, the quality of life of an area. I think Viroqua is really, really interesting because Viroqua has really broken the mold on a lot of those statistics and really disproven a lot of the things that that people think about rural America and have kind of overcome the barriers that people would consider consistent, I think. So when you talk about having this growth in the population of people under 30 and young families, I mean, that's probably one of the most consistently talked about economic problems with most of the Midwest even. And it's something I think people would consider to be more concentrated in rural areas. So I think when you consider all of that, and then you have a town like Viroqua in the middle of a pretty rural Vernon County, and you show them those statistics and you walk them down Main Street, I think it's, that in and of itself is a reason to start thinking more creatively and realizing that, not one size doesn't fit all when it comes to economic development or community development. I think, we have to use things like that to encourage people to just, get together and start doing something.
Yeah.
Figure out what local assets you can leverage and just give something a shot.
Yep. I think that's the biggest thing too. And I think one of the reasons that Viroqua specifically is so successful when it comes to attracting younger people to the area and support for businesses is that we're not so focused on attracting millennials. Mm-hmm. You go to all of these different economic development conferences and people want to talk about how to attract millennials like it's some subspecies of human beings.
Well, kind of. I mean, as a Generation Xer, like, what are you doing?
We're a little weird.
But I mean, so many of these groups are so focused on those things, but Generation Z has already graduated from college. And so we're so focused, we're so focused on how to bring in the millennials that we forget about other programming. And so I feel like the focus for the Viroqua Chamber Main Street has been to appeal to everyone. Mm-hmm. I would love to see baby boomers who are entrepreneurs who want to open businesses as well as young people. And I think in appealing to wider groups of people, we've attracted on purpose and by accident some of these fantastic creative minds.
Absolutely. And I think on top of that, it's kind of proves that the mold hasn't really changed that much, right? Like the way you attract people to your town has kind of always been the same. Mm-hmm. If you can present a certain amount of diversity and opportunity and vibrancy in your central commercial districts, you'll probably have a pretty strong population.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a huge city or a huge town, or that commercial district doesn't have to be huge. It's just, people want to do stuff. They want to see things going on. Right. They want to feel like they're a part of a community. So I think those things kind of apply to everyone. There's not some huge generational divide that we need to spend all this time trying to figure out.
Right.
I think in that respect, and I think you guys have proven that here, that in that respect, at least things are not quite as complicated as we make them sometimes.
Right.
I do think that that's one of the beautiful pieces of Co-Starters, though, honestly, is you have multi-generations coming together to be able to either share or learn at different stages of the entrepreneurial process and different stages of life that create that vibrancy and that sophistication of community that you were talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. I think all of that, and I talk about this all the time on the podcast, like it changes the identity. And if Viroqua had nothing else going on for it, because it certainly does have some amazing things going on for it, but if it had nothing else, it's that identity piece that there is a belief that the small business system here and that economic system that exists here is powerful and strong and important for the identity of the community. As a chamber organization, we are member driven, we are member focused, and we are also member financed. We have a strong support, not only in the city, but in regional matters, because people see what we're doing and they want to be a part of that identity. So I know Couleecap is a huge part of that. It's changing the perception of rural America. If I had to rebrand this podcast, I think one of the beautiful things, 54665 is a really powerful number because that's where we are and that's where we're centered. Mm-hmm. But the number that I'm the most proud of is the 4,362. because through cooperations of organizations like yours at Couleecap and the Viroqua Chamber Main Street, we are changing that identity. We are proving to the world that what we're doing here is beautiful, it's smart, and it's calculated. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on today and talking a little bit about doing what you do.
Absolutely.
And Nora, do you have anything you want to follow up with?
I think, for any listeners who are in the area who may be interested in participating in Co-Starters this year, please be in touch either on Facebook or Aaron, why don't you give your contact information so that people can be in touch with you if they're interested in info.
So the Facebook page that you would go to is actually Couleeco. So just Coulee and then CO. Feel free to shoot me a message on there. Otherwise, my email address is my name, AARON.REIMLER @couleecap.org. So feel free to shoot me an email. We can, start talking about your business idea early if you want, or if you just want a little bit more information about the program and the curriculum. I'm happy to talk with you, or feel free to give Nora a call and she can send you my way as well. Even if you're just a little bit curious, we're always happy to talk to people about this stuff and answer any questions you might have.
Sweet. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Of course.